Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello everyone, I'm Mahdi Jafari. Today I will present to you this essay on behalf of my friend and colleague Mr. Hossein Azarinia. I'm honored to be among you. Monuments are for the living, not the dead. Preserve them, love them, and pass it on to generations to understand their importance. I believe cultural monuments are the most powerful connections between the past, present, and the future. Those long-lasting manifestations of human culture are the best means to converse with the human past, and by them we hope to pass on the accumulated wisdom of our generation. Cultural sites require care. Especially religious monuments are in dire need of attention, since these monuments are more likely to be subjected to deliberate destruction. How can we preserve and protect the cultural monuments and cultural places? Is there any effective legal basis that can practically help us to preserve these places? Today I'm going to talk about the essential measures that are available to us to protect and preserve cultural places and monuments. I would be honored if this discussion helps our community to further utilize the legal toolbox that is available to all of us to preserve the shining beacons of human culture, the monuments. I hope that in the future we can discuss how we can develop and enhance legal measures for protection and preservation of cultural monuments. Due to the international community's attention to cultural rights and the environment, cultural sites must be respected by all means. Any action against such places or negligence to protect them is considered an immense ill treat. Cultural places are of great importance, both in the human environment and in preservation of the culture. The importance has also been noted in international documents. However, we have frequently seen that these places have been neglected. Some of this negligence is simply due to not paying attention to these places by the governments and the people. At the same time, we witness occasional violence against these places. We are planning to explore the importance of preserving cultural sites which deserve our religious respect, as well as example of negligence against these sacred places. Given the theme of the conference, if we want to open our hearts to the world and have compassion in action, we must understand each other. Understanding is one of the most noteworthy key concepts in biosocial work that can lead to justice, peace, and sustainability. One of the most obvious manifestations of such understanding is caring for places that people from different cultures respect collectively, namely the cultural places. The requirement of religious respect is to strive to preserve these places and to eliminate factors that could threaten their safety, including war, intolerance, aggression, and etc. Only then can we ensure that we have a world full of lasting peace and universal justice that would lead to an active and healthy social life. In today's world, we can witness people from different cultures interact in an ever more complex system. Legal knowledge helps us and seek to find different ways to regulate these relationships from different sections of the society in order to reduce the tension as much as possible. One of the following topics in juridical science, which deals with the study and regulation of relationships between diverse and pluralistic individuals, is cultural law. In addition to this reciprocal right, human beings must have the right environment to live, Adequate environment in addition to the natural environment include the human environment. Although environmental law is the third category of human rights, it seems that cultural right can be considered as the first category of human right due to its close connection to civil and political life. Cultural rights have been under scrutiny since World War I and have received a great deal of attention from the international community to this day. Therefore, it has developed for 100 years. Framing the cultural law based on the system of private law or intellectual property law is among the most interesting theoretical topics. However, the important point to us right now are the instances of cultural rights that are emerging in the socio-cultural context of the world. The right to physical and cultural survival, or the right to enjoy material and spiritual heritage, are among the most important issues discussed in cultural law. We are going to address them here. One of the topics discussed under the heading is the discussion of cultural places that are considered from different aspects. These places have their roots in common values of a cultural community that reflect their religious identity. For this reason, and given the development today, the protection of cultural heritage is a public duty that is introduced as the common heritage of humanity. It may seem that it is pointless to talk about this concept before the emergence of human rights. However, in my opinion, we can trace back these concepts of right to protect and to preserve throughout human history and human social life. Safeguarding these rights have been a necessity of social life, and by violating them, we have witnessed many catastrophes in which their destructive effects are still active to this day. Some of these tragedies have caused the destruction of human communities, and some have left their grief in the hearts of a community to this day. The most important manifestation of these human catastrophes is the religious sectarian wars throughout the history. These wars have sometimes led to the loss of life, mental pillar, and sometimes led to destruction of the remained heritage, the material pillar. The destruction of these heritage has a major material element that is deeply connected to cultural sites. The destruction of cultural monuments is certainly associated with destruction of a community's past. For example, in history of the Middle East, we see that the dynasties of a Turk monarchy, in order to prove their loyalty to the Abbasid Caliphate, eliminated a large number of dissidents. What highlights these actions is the demonstrative religious motive of the kings. As an example, in 1029, Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi marched on Ray. According to sources, in addition to a large number of people that were killed by his march, a large number of libraries in the city were set to fire because of the presence of books belonging to the Shia school of thought. Also, in 1055 or 1056, Sultan Tughrul Beg Saljuqi invaded Baghdad. Following this incident, the Shia libraries of the city were set on fire several times. Also, the library and house of the Shia scholar of the time, Sheikh Tusi, were burned down, which eventually led to his migration to the city of Najaf. The extent of damage to these libraries and setting on fire cannot be calculated. The only thing that can be said is that a large part of the Shia heritage has been destroyed because of these actions, and the identity of Shia has been seriously damaged. Such things have happened many times throughout history. Actions have been commonly taken against historical cultural buildings even in recent times. For example, the Baburi Mosque in India and the Sufi tombs in Libya were attacked and destroyed in 1998 and 2012. In actions against holy places, there are two elements that are attacked: a material element, that is the building, and an immaterial element that has a sense of belonging and respect. The urgent need to take action against these important places could be divided into two parts. Firstly, it is necessary to think of measures to prevent them from encroachment, and secondly, to take the necessary follow-up after the violent action has happened. For example, international organizations such as UNESCO, after the attacks on shrines in Samarra in Iraq, paid great attention to the protection of these monuments and provided assistance for restoration, and as a result, the city of Samarra is still a World Heritage Site in Iraq. Over the years, human beings have decided to take steps to protect their identities from harm. To this end, we can witness the development of agreements between different countries so that they can more easily guarantee the rights of their citizens. Consequently, the idea of forming a global organization to support the victim was developed. Therefore, the protection of cultural places promoted to a higher level. The goal was almost achieved after the World War I. In the final stage, after the Second World War, the United Nations fully established itself in the international community, and other organizations were gradually formed alongside it to guarantee and assist the implementation of human rights, including cultural rights. As I mentioned before, the restoration and preservation of historical buildings is of great importance, especially since they represent a cultural identity. They show off the common heritage of humanity. Usually, there is no clear definition of this phrase, the common heritage of humanity. We should study its similar application in issues such as maritime law and environmental law. Here, it is appropriate to refer to Article 53 of First Protocol and Article 16 of Second Protocol of the Geneva Convention, which prohibits the following: acts of any hostile actions against historical, artistic, and religious sites that are considered part of the cultural and spiritual heritage of the people, utilization of cultural, artistic, and religious sites for military purposes, retaliatory actions against such works. Of course, in cultural law, the issue of sites should not be limited to historical sites. Rather, it should be noted that cultural sites may not have a historical aspect, which cannot be ignored. But what seems more important here is the right to participate in cultural life, as enshrined in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And the enjoyment of such places is undoubtedly a component of cultural life. These organizations adopt various statutes and methods to carry out their work, which are reflected in their published documents. Given the current issue, we need to carefully examine the cultural rights recognized in the international instruments, especially those related to cultural sites. It is unfortunate that despite the recognition of these rights, we continue to face violations of them. After I discuss the legal grounds of preservation of cultural sites and monuments, I will mention and discuss some especially interesting cases of violation against these places which require further attention. Now, let's review the international community's attention to the protection of cultural sites. There are many documents about this, and the following have been selected because of their greater importance and reputation. The first case that I'm going to review is the Treaty on the Protection of Artistic and Scientific Institutions and Historical Monuments, commonly called as Rurik Pact, in 1935. Although this treaty applies to the Americans, some articles of the 1954 Hague Convention, like the third article or the paragraph 2 of Article 36, refer to this convention, which is of great importance in international instruments, especially about protection of all national and personal immovable property, which constitute the cultural treasure of people in times of war and peace. In the 8th article of this convention, important issues such as the protection of historical monuments, museums, scientific or artistic or cultural sites are specifically addressed. The next case that I'm going to discuss is the famous 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. This convention, adopted in 1954 in The Hague, the Netherlands, following the widespread destruction of cultural heritage during the Second World War. The convention includes movable and immovable cultural heritage, including ancient architectural, art historical, and archaeological sites. In this convention, state parties benefit from their mutual commitment to protect cultural heritage from the consequences of possible armed conflict. This mutual commitment and benefits includes carrying out safeguard in a peacetime to protect the cultural sites, respecting other cultures' properties. It even suggests the establishment of a special unit among the military forces that are responsible for the protection of cultural property. It also discusses the penalties that should be paid for violation of this convention. The third example that I'm going to mention is the 1972 World Heritage Convention. The purpose of this convention, which is one of the most important documents of international law about cultural places, is to identify, protect, preserve, and introduce the world's valuable natural and cultural heritage to the next generation. Article 1 defines monuments, group of buildings, and sites as separate entities which should be protected. It is mentioned in the convention that state parties shall endeavor to protect cultural heritage. As Article 4 states, each state party to this convention recognizes that the duty of ensuring the identification, protection, conservation, presentation, and transmission to future generations of the cultural and natural heritage. It will do all it can to this end, to the utmost of its resources and where appropriate with any international assistance and cooperation. In Article 6, the Convention states, the states parties to this Convention recognizes that such heritage constitutes a world heritage for whose protection it is the duty of the international community as a whole to cooperate, undertake, to give up their help in the identification, protection, conservation, and presentation of the cultural and natural heritage. Not to take any deliberate measures which might damage directly or indirectly the cultural and natural heritage. Thus, governments can be expected to work to restore and rebuild a sacred site of historical significance, such as an old mosque or a historical church, It should be noted that international organizations have to be supportive as well as governments, as mentioned in the introduction and several articles, like Article 7 and 19. In accordance with Article 8, and for this type of protection, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee has been established. Of course, there are other international organizations for the protection of cultural heritage, such as the International Center for the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, or International Council on Monuments and Sites. The support that each of these organizations provides is in different way, like preparation of two updated lists, the World Heritage List and the Endangered World Heritage List, in accordance with Article 11. Of course, the committee's support for the buildings registered in the list does not mean neglecting and not supporting other buildings, and Article 12 states the same thing. The next case that we are going to review is the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief, 1981. The United Nations General Assembly announces that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right shall include freedom to have a religion or whatever belief of his choice, and freedom either individually or in a community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. Also, in the 6th article, in accordance with the previous article that I just read, the present declaration, and subject to the provisions of 1st article, paragraph 3, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief shall include the following freedoms. The most important freedom that is mentioned in the declaration is to worship or assemble in connection with a religion or belief, and to establish and maintain places for these purposes. There are also other rights and freedoms that are mentioned in this declaration, which we are going to skip for now. Now, let's talk about the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action adopted by the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna on June 1993. Given the priority of protecting and promoting human rights and their consequences of the inherent dignity and worth of human beings, the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Covenants, and other sources of international law adopted the mentioned declaration. We can see in this declaration, specifically in Article 22, Part 2, the World Conference on Human Rights calls upon all governments to take all appropriate measures in compliance with their international obligations and with due regard to their respective legal systems to counter intolerance and related violence based on religion or belief, including practices of discrimination against the woman, and including the desecration of religious sites, recognizing that every individual has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, expression, and religion. The next instance that I'm going to talk about is a Resolution 55/1997. It is called Elimination of All Forms of Religious Intolerance, which is adopted by the General Assembly. Having regard to the Charter of the United Nations, Human Rights, and Fundamental Freedoms, the General Assembly expresses its grave concern at any attack upon religious places, sites, and shrines, and calls upon all states, in accordance with their national legislation and in conformity with international human rights standards, to exert their utmost effort to ensure that such places, sites, and shrines are fully respected and protected. The next case that I'm going to talk about is also a resolution, Resolution 55/254. It is called Protection of Religious Sites, and it is adopted by the General Assembly in 2001. The preamble to this resolution, in addition to the well-known human rights instruments, refer to other international laws. In this resolution, the General Assembly condemns all acts or threats of violence, destruction, damage, or endangerment of religious sites. The General Assembly also calls on all countries to do their utmost to ensure the full respect and protection of religious sites in accordance with international standards and national laws, and to take adequate measures to prevent acts of violence or intimidation. NGOs are invited to participate in these efforts by developing appropriate initiatives in this area. The General Assembly also encourages all countries, governmental and non-governmental organizations, and the relevant media to promote through education a culture of tolerance and respect for the diversity of religions and religious sites, which represents an important aspect of humanity's collective heritage. Now that we talked about the legal basis that can help us to protect and preserve religious monuments, let's talk about what happens after these rights are violated or an action is taken against these kind of places. When actions of violence is taken against holy sites, it is expected that the perpetrators to be prosecuted. This is the first step, and that is what the international community expects us to do. But at the same time, we must think of reconstruction and compensation. In doing so, governments, communities, and NGOs must pay extensive attention to the affected communities and help them both with financial and non-financial support. Failure to do so would only intensify the catastrophic effects on the initial destruction. Failure to prosecution can undermine peace. As an example, we can consider the case of the destruction of the Al-Askari holy shrines, which according to the Shia school of thought is the burial place of one of the holy imams from the progeny of the Holy Prophet of Islam. The shrine of Samarra was destroyed by explosion in 2006. Following the incident, many measures were taken to protect and rebuild the holy site. It was investigated by the international community that in addition to the material destruction of the explosion, the incident also causes catastrophic psychological effects on the respective communities. Unfortunately, after the explosion, the illusion was created that the Shia blamed Sunnis and sought revenge. In line with this action of provoking hatred, we can refer to the book entitled Mosques in the Face of Fire, or Masajid fil Wajh al-Nar, by the Center of Al-Rashid in Iraq, which has tried to introduce Shia community as the culprit with harsh and sectarian literature. It was a really bad book and spread a lot of rumors and hatred among Iraqi community. It seems that these actions were the result of not pursuing the elements and entities that caused such destruction in accordance with international law. In the process of identifying and persecuting the perpetrators and rebuilding the damaged and ruined places, perhaps if strong and serious pursuits had been made following the action, the Shia would no longer have been accused of such acts of violence, and more public successful outcome would have been achieved. Now, I would like to draw your attention to an informative case study. Mr. Azarnian and his friend and colleague Mr. Sedehi, wrote and published a report. It is called The Report on Countering Islamophobia, Anti-Muslim Hatred to Eliminate Discrimination and Intolerance Based on Religion or Belief. It is published in the United Nations Human Rights website, OHCHR. Whenever the issue of discrimination against Muslims or followers of any other religion is being discussed, all the focus goes to places where the group is considered as a minority. The point we try to make in this report concerns countries and regions where another group of that religion form the majority, which may be named sectarianism. In some countries, which a specific domination of a religion is in the majority, the other denomination is very vulnerable and likely to be the victim of discrimination. In these countries, maybe the minority group is being treated by the majority. This can be considered as a discrimination against Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and so on, who make up the minority by the majority with the same religion. Regarding this, here we present our report on this matter. In the following, we will discuss the issue relating to the holy places. In the past, some holy sites have been damaged by governmental and non-governmental aggressors, and the remains of some of these buildings have survived until today. Even today, we sometimes see different groups encroach on these holy places. Aggressors include military groups, militias, terrorists, and even religiously motivated individuals in case of sectarian conflicts or neglecting minority rights. Governments are expected to work to help people preserve their cultural heritage, which is the common heritage of all humanity, such as historical sites, rituals, tradition, and customs. As the 1954 Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property states, being convinced that damage to cultural property belonging to any group of people whatsoever means damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind, since each people makes its contribution to the culture of the world. Moreover, the 1972 Convention says, considering that the existing international conventions, recommendations, and resolutions concerning cultural and natural property demonstrate the importance for all the people of the world of safeguarding this unique and irreplaceable property to whatever people it may belong. In this case, which presents reports of instances of discrimination and hatred against followers of a particular religion in relation to their holy places and rituals, we focused on the places where rites, traditions, customs, and worship are intertwined with physical places. Therefore, the encroachment on these holy places and the restriction in dealing with them according to the introduction and Articles 1, 2, and 8 of the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, are acts of violence and discrimination in freedom to practice their rituals, traditions, customs, worships, and in general, cultural expression. All governments are expected to allow followers of religions to participate in the construction, to repair these sites, and to gather in them and practice their rituals, and further to consider the provisions of this freedom in their laws. Sacred places include cloisters, synagogues, churches, mosques, Hoseiniyas, which are the places where Shia gather together to have religious lectures and rituals, cemeteries, shrines, monuments, and other historical or spiritual holy sites to which they feel belong and respect. This respect is the result of mental elements of a human, such as sanctification, blessing, and other manifestations that appear because of his or her belief. When governments deprive people of such freedoms, they restrict their cultural expression and, as a result, discriminate against them. Thus, governments should pay attention to the protection of these respected places for the sake of a follower of religions who are part of a society, and the government should take appropriate measures in this regard. The 1972 Convention states, considering that parts of the cultural or natural heritage are of outstanding interest and therefore need to be preserved as part of the world heritage of mankind as a whole. For example, if they request to legally open a mosque or a church and people ask to pray there, the government should not ignore their rights and restrict their cultural expression. Also, if they want to legally repair and activate a sacred building, such as a mosque, cemetery, or a monument, the government should not prevent this, but rather they should encourage them and provide financial and non-financial assistance in accordance with legal regulations, such as facilitating administrative and operational conditions for reconstruction. The government should try to preserve this cultural heritage. In case of governmental obstruction or refusal of support, the contents of the 1954 Convention is ignored, since its introduction suggests, being of the opinion that such protection cannot be effective unless both national and international measures have been taken to organize it in time of peace, being determined to take all possible steps to protect cultural property. We must emphasize that government should not restrict a group from engaging in the affairs of their own cultural sites, such as repairing, actively participating, holding ceremonies, performing traditions, blessings, and donation in various forms. For example, the government, as the defender of cultural expressions and the custodian of cultural heritage, should not tax the funds spent on sacred places or prevent the performance of rituals and traditions in a way that offends the general. These conditions stand even in period of war, as the Article 53 of the 1977 Protocol, the first protocol to the 1949 Convention, says, without prejudice to the provisions of the Hague Convention and of other relevant international instruments, it is prohibited: a. to commit any acts of hostility directed against the historical monuments, works of art, or places of worship which constitute the cultural or spiritual heritage of people; b. to use such objects in support of the military effort; and c. to make such objects the object of reprisal. Also, the Article 16 of the 1977 Second Protocol to the 1949 the Hague Convention, it is prohibited to commit any acts of hostility directed against historical monuments, works of art, or places of worship. In addition to government support for them, international human rights organizations such as UNESCO are expected to provide comprehensive assistance to affected groups when needed. As the 1954 Convention mentions, considering that the preservation of the cultural heritage is of great importance for all people of the world, and that it is important that this heritage should receive international protection, and similarly, the 1972 Convention states almost the same thing in the introduction. In regard to this, it is appropriate to mention one of the actions taken jointly by the Iraqi government and UNESCO. It is written in the website of UN that both sides, means UNESCO and Iraqi governments, have concluded an agreement on reconstructing the Al-Askari Holy Shrine in Samarra, badly damaged by attacks last year and earlier this month. as the protection and preservation of all cultural and natural heritage is recognized as a universal value in today's world, considering that the sacred places certainly have both cultural and natural character, protection of sacred places has significant importance. So, what is our responsibility? First, I want to emphasize that if we want to put an end to this vicious cycle of violence, we should be able to prosecute those who violate the cultural rights. This is the only way that can further help us further to prevent happening of this kind of catastrophes. Secondly, I want to mention that different groups, different followers of religions have rights to rebuild and reconstruct their sacred sites. Governments that obstruct the exercise of this right, or more regrettably, infringe on it, are primarily responsible to that particular community as well as to the international community. Finally, I would like to propose that custodian of these sites consider the necessary arrangements for the world inclusion of these sites in the World Heritage List. Furthermore, they are expected to try to use the assistance of international organizations to protect and repair their cultural heritage. In the end, let us pray for peace and justice. Allahumma ajjal li waliyika al-faraj. O Allah, please hasten the reappearance of your Hujjah. Thank you.